The night the Duke came, winter pressed its cold mouth against the windows of Ashcombe Hall, frosting the glass as though even the weather wished to peer inside. Chandeliers blazed above polished marble floors, scattering light over silk gowns and jeweled throats, yet beneath the brilliance lay a current of quiet desperation. This was not merely a ball, it was a bargaining table dressed as celebration. Every smile had been rehearsed, every courtesy sharpened. In corners and corridors, fortunes trembled, and among the daughters displayed like porcelain, there was one whose name was not spoken, whose presence was treated as an unfortunate draught. She stood where the light thinned, near a pillar draped in winter roses already browning at their edges. Her gown was respectable, deliberately so, fashioned in somber gray that neither offended nor invited notice. Those who glanced her way did so briefly, as one looks at a closed door. She had learned the art of stillness early, of making herself small without appearing rude. This was Eleanor Ashcombe, though tonight she was known only as the other one, the daughter kept in reserve, like a truth the family preferred not to tell aloud. Her father moved through the room with the frantic grace of a man balancing on thinning ice. Sir Percival Ashcombe bowed too often, laughed too quickly, his palms damp despite the chill. He spoke of lineage, of estates bruised by poor harvests and unkind markets, of daughters raised with every advantage a gentleman could afford. When he gestured, it was never toward Eleanor. His hand curved around absence, presenting instead the two younger girls glittering beside the fire, rehearsed smiles trembling with ambition. They were beautiful in the manner society adored, hair arranged in obedient curls, voices trained to sound amused but not intelligent. Guests leaned closer to hear them speak, assessing value with practiced eyes. Eleanor watched from her pillar, feeling neither envy nor hope, only the familiar ache of invisibility. It had been decided long ago that she was too quiet, too serious, too marked by the shadow of a mother who died before her worth could be argued. Tonight merely confirmed what childhood had taught her, that some daughters are born to be displayed, and some to be hidden. The arrival of the Duke cut through conversation like a blade through silk. Sound thinned, laughter faltered, and every spine straightened in reflexive respect. He entered without flourish, tall, dark-coated, his expression unreadable as stone warmed by firelight. This was a man whose favor altered maps, whose silence carried more weight than another's vows. Eleanor did not look at him at first. She had trained herself not to notice what was never meant for her. Yet something in the room shifted, as if the air itself were waiting. So Percival was upon him at once, bowing so low his dignity creaked. Words spilled forth, eager and polished. He spoke the sentence Eleanor had heard in her dreams and dreads alike, the one that reduced her life to a calculation. Choose any daughter you wish, your grace. It was said brightly, generously, as though abundance reigned. Eleanor felt the phrase strike and pass over her like cold rain. She remained in shadow, a figure behind the velvet curtain of her family's ambition. The Duke listened without interruption. His gaze moved where it was guided, resting dutifully upon the smiling sisters, weighing, measuring. Then, almost imperceptibly, it drifted. Eleanor felt it before she saw it, a pressure like warmth upon chilled skin. She raised her eyes despite herself. For a breath, the world narrowed. He did not look away quickly, as others did. His attention did not skim. It settled, heavy and searching, as though he was seeing not a flaw, but a question. A whisper rippled nearby, sharp with confusion. Someone laughed too loudly. So Percival followed the Duke's line of sight and stiffened, panic flickering across his features before being smothered by a smile. He shifted, subtly, as if to block the view, as if Eleanor were a draft to be shut out. She lowered her gaze again, shame rising unbidden, certain this accidental noticing would be corrected. It always was. Men like the Duke did not come searching for women like her. But the Duke did not correct himself. He did not turn back at once. Silence stretched, thin and dangerous. In that pause, something unspoken crossed the space between them, a recognition neither had expected. Eleanor felt the old certainty falter, just enough to hurt. The room seemed to hold its breath. Candles guttered. A violin faltered mid-note. Then the Duke inclined his head slightly, not in dismissal, but acknowledgement, and the smallest fracture appeared in the story Eleanor had been told about her place. No words followed, yet the damage was done. Eyes turned, recalculating. So Percival cleared his throat and laughed again, louder, too loud, repeating his offer as though repetition might erase the moment. "Choose any daughter, your grace." Eleanor remained still, heart striking hard against her ribs, aware that for the first time, remaining unseen was no longer guaranteed. The Duke said nothing. He only stood, composed, his silence deliberate, his gaze steady in her direction a moment longer than courtesy allowed. In that stretched second, Eleanor understood that whatever came next would not be gentle. Something had been chosen already, though no name had been spoken, and the life she had learned to endure was beginning, quietly and irrevocably, to end. It was not hope she felt, nor fear alone, but the vertigo of standing at the edge of a truth long denied. The room resumed its breath, unaware that a quiet rebellion had begun, born not of defiance, but of being seen. For Eleanor Ashcombe, the daughter hidden behind pillars and polite lies, the night had already altered its course, and nothing waiting beyond this silence would ever return her to shadow, not even if she begged it to with all her remaining strength. Morning light revealed what candlelight had disguised, the consequences of attention. By the time the household stirred, Ashcombe Hall was already humming with unease, as though the walls themselves had overheard too much. Eleanor woke with the peculiar sensation of having been touched without contact, her thoughts circling the Duke's silence like a moth around flame. Nothing improper had occurred, and yet everything felt altered. In the looking-glass, her face appeared unchanged, but her eyes held a question she could not quiet. At breakfast, her sisters spoke too brightly, recounting imagined triumphs, inventing glances that had not occurred. Sir Percival praised their charm with exaggerated warmth, never once meeting Eleanor's gaze. He was determined to believe the night had passed as planned, that the Duke's momentary distraction was nothing more than curiosity soon corrected. Eleanor listened politely, her hands folded, her posture careful. Years of practice had taught her how to exist without invitation. Yet beneath that discipline stirred an unfamiliar tension, as if some internal cord had been drawn too tight to loosen again. The Duke did not leave Ashcombe Hall as expected. His carriage remained in the drive, dark and imposing, its presence a constant reminder that silence could linger longer than words. Servants whispered as they passed Eleanor in corridors, their glances no longer indifferent but speculative. She felt herself becoming visible in a way that was neither kind nor cruel, merely dangerous. To be noticed without protection was a precarious state, one she had been trained to avoid. It began with something small. A book appeared on the escritoire in the morning room, placed there with deliberate care. It was bound in worn leather, its pages annotated in a firm, elegant hand. Eleanor recognized it at once, a volume she had once admired aloud before being reminded such interests were impractical. No note accompanied it, no explanation offered. She touched the cover lightly, as though it might vanish under her fingers. The gesture was unmistakable in its intimacy. Someone had listened. Someone had remembered. By afternoon, the household buzzed with restrained alarm. Sir Percival questioned servants sharply, his composure fraying. He instructed Eleanor to remain in her rooms, then rescinded the order moments later, fearing the Duke might notice her absence. Her sisters watched her with narrowed eyes, confusion edging toward resentment. Eleanor moved carefully, conscious that each step now carried weight. She had done nothing to earn this scrutiny, and yet she bore its full measure. When the Duke appeared again, it was in the garden, where winter roses clung stubbornly to life. Eleanor had retreated there seeking quiet, her breath clouding the air as she walked. She did not hear him approach until his shadow fell across the frost. He greeted her with perfect courtesy, his tone formal, his expression unreadable. They spoke of trivialities, the weather, the estate, the roses that refused to yield. Yet beneath the surface of polite exchange flowed a current of deliberate attention. He asked her opinion and waited for it. He listened without interruption. He did not glance away when she spoke. From an upstairs window, the scene was observed. What passed between them required no touch, no whispered confidence. It was the simple, radical act of standing beside her as though it were natural. By evening, rumor had ripened into scandal. Guests who had lingered for the Duke's convenience now lingered for Eleanor's undoing. Whispers threaded through drawing rooms, speculation sharpening into judgment. The daughter no one saw had become the daughter no one could ignore. So Percival confronted her privately, his voice trembling with fear disguised as authority. He warned her against presumption, reminded her of her duty, her limitations. Eleanor listened, her expression calm, though something within her hardened. She realized then that dignity, once discovered, was difficult to surrender. She did not argue. She did not promise obedience. She merely inclined her head, a gesture so composed it unsettled him more than defiance. That evening, as guests gathered again beneath the chandeliers, Eleanor felt the weight of countless eyes. The Duke entered late, as before, and the room stilled in anticipation. So Percival approached him at once, repeating the familiar offer with increasing urgency. "Choose any daughter you wish." The words rang louder now, edged with desperation. Eleanor stood apart, her hands steady, her pulse loud in her ears. She told herself she expected nothing. She told herself she was prepared to retreat into shadow again. The Duke did not answer. Instead, he crossed the room and placed something gently upon the table beside Eleanor. A single winter rose, its petals pale but unblemished, cut cleanly from the garden. The gesture was neither loud nor dramatic, yet it struck the room into silence more complete than any declaration. Eleanor looked at the flower, then at him, her breath catching. He met her gaze briefly, gravely, as though asking a question only she could answer. Around them, society reeled, grasping for language to contain what had just been offered without explanation. The rose lay between them like a promise or a provocation, and Eleanor understood that whatever came next would demand more than endurance. It would demand choice, and the cost of being seen was about to be collected. The invitation came without ceremony, delivered not by servant but by the Duke himself, in a voice so measured it allowed no room for refusal. He asked if she might walk with him before supper, as though such a thing were ordinary, as though the house were not already straining beneath the weight of speculation. Eleanor agreed because dignity required it, and because something within her had grown tired of retreat. They moved through quiet corridors into the smaller library, a room seldom used, warmed by a single fire and the scent of old paper. When the door closed, the world beyond it seemed to loosen its grip. For a moment, neither spoke. The Duke stood near the hearth, his gloves removed and placed carefully aside, while Eleanor remained by the window, her hands folded, her posture precise. The silence was not awkward, but dense, like mist before rain. She assumed he would apologize, or correct the misunderstanding his attention had caused. She prepared herself to accept such words gracefully. What she had not prepared for was the way he studied her now, not as a curiosity, but as a person whose thoughts mattered. He began not with explanation, but with a question. He asked whether she found the attention directed toward her uncomfortable. The simplicity of it disarmed her. No one had ever inquired after her comfort where society was concerned. Eleanor answered honestly, though her voice trembled slightly. She said that discomfort was familiar to her, but confusion was new. He nodded, as if this confirmed something long suspected. He moved closer, not intrusively, but enough that she could see the faint scar near his temple, the evidence of a life lived beyond ballrooms. He told her he had noticed how she listened when others spoke, how she weighed words before offering them. He said such habits were rare, and often cultivated by necessity rather than choice. Eleanor felt the old instinct to deflect praise rise within her, but he did not allow it space. He asked why she stood apart, why she expected so little. The question struck deeper than intended. She hesitated, then spoke with care, choosing truth without indulgence. She told him she had learned early that some children are loved loudly, and others quietly endured. She spoke of being useful rather than cherished, of being praised for obedience and overlooked for absence. Her voice remained steady, but her hands tightened, betraying the effort it cost to remain composed. She did not accuse. She merely described. The Duke listened without interruption. When she finished, he did not respond at once. He stared into the fire, his expression unreadable, before turning back to her with something like resolve. He said he recognized that sort of upbringing, though it had been gilded rather than ignored. He spoke of expectations mistaken for affection, of being chosen repeatedly for what he represented rather than who he was. His words were restrained, but the weight beneath them was unmistakable. Eleanor realized then that this was not a conversation meant to lead to flattery or flirtation. It was an exchange of truths rarely spoken aloud. She felt an unexpected kinship, tempered by caution. When he asked what she desired, she almost laughed, the sound catching in her throat. No one had ever framed the question so plainly. She answered that she desired peace, and the freedom to be neither hidden nor displayed. The Duke regarded her intently, as though committing the words to memory. A soft knock sounded at the door, a reminder of the world's persistence. Neither moved to answer it. Instead, the Duke reached into his coat and produced a small object, placing it on the table between them. It was a key, old and unadorned. He explained it belonged to a gate at the edge of the estate gardens, rarely used. He said she might find it useful, should she ever wish for solitude without scrutiny. The gift was practical, discreet, and profoundly personal. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, though she did not allow them to fall. She thanked him with a gravity that matched his own. The moment stretched, fragile and intimate, until footsteps passed outside the door and voices murmured beyond it. The spell loosened. The Duke stepped back, restoring distance, restoring formality. He inclined his head, his expression once more composed. He said only that he hoped she would use the key, and that he regretted nothing he had done. When they returned to the hall, the noise rushed back to meet them. Eyes turned, measuring, searching for signs of impropriety. Eleanor felt different, though nothing visible had changed. She held herself with a steadiness born not of habit, but of choice. The Duke resumed his place among the guests, his manner unchanged, his silence as deliberate as ever. Yet when their eyes met across the room, there was no confusion in his gaze, only certainty. Eleanor understood then that this private confession had not been an ending, but a threshold. Whatever he intended, it would not be retracted quietly. She felt the weight of the key in her palm, hidden within her glove, and sensed that it opened more than a garden gate. Somewhere beyond the polite clamor, a decision was forming, one that would soon demand more than silence. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor knew that what had never been asked before would soon be demanded of her, and of him, in full view of a society unprepared for the answer. The evening gathered itself with deliberate splendor, as though the house sensed the necessity of spectacle. Candles were replenished, musicians retuned, and the great drawing-room filled once more with velvet voices and measured laughter. Word had spread that the Duke would announce his intentions before the night concluded. Society leaned forward, hungry for resolution. Sir Percival Ashcombe moved among his guests with brittle animation, rehearsing gratitude in advance, while Eleanor stood near the edge of the assembly, composed yet keenly aware that whatever was decided would fall most heavily upon her. She had not spoken to the Duke since their private conversation. He had offered no reassurance, no promise. That omission weighed upon her more than uncertainty ever had. To be chosen quietly was one thing. To be chosen publicly was another entirely. She told herself she was prepared for disappointment, that she would accept invisibility again if required. Yet the knowledge she carried now made retreat feel like a lie she could no longer convincingly perform. The Duke entered at the appointed hour, his presence commanding attention without effort. Conversation dimmed around him, guests parting instinctively to grant passage. He did not seek Eleanor immediately. Instead, he allowed the room to settle, to gather its expectations tightly enough that they might soon snap. So Percival approached, bowing deeply, his voice ringing with forced confidence as he repeated the offer that had become both plea and shield. "Choose any daughter you wish, Your Grace." The words hovered, absurd in their generosity, dangerous in their implication. Silence followed, heavier than before. The Duke's gaze moved deliberately across the room, touching faces, acknowledging rank, weighing not beauty but consequence. Eleanor felt each second pass like the slow ticking of a clock she could not see. Her sisters smiled, their composure wavering. Sir Percival's jaw tightened. The Duke drew a breath, and with it seemed to draw the room inward. He spoke at last, his voice calm, resonant, and unmistakably final. He said he would choose, but not as expected. He said that he would not bargain for what should be freely given, nor accept a decision shaped solely by convenience. A murmur rippled through the assembly, confusion sharpening into unease. Then he turned, and without flourish, extended his hand toward Eleanor. The gesture was simple. Its impact was not. Gasps erupted, quickly stifled by decorum, while whispers flared like sparks along dry tinder. Eleanor felt the room tilt, her senses narrowing to the sight of his hand, steady and unyielding. For a heartbeat, she could not move. She searched his face for doubt and found none. There was no command in his posture, only invitation, and something like respect. Sir Percival's protest came too late, strangled by shock. The Duke did not look at him. His attention remained fixed upon Eleanor, as though the rest of the room had dissolved. She stepped forward slowly, aware of every eye, every judgment. When her gloved fingers met his, the contact was brief, restrained, yet it sent a tremor through her that had nothing to do with fear. He did not announce a name at once. Instead, he turned slightly, positioning her beside him, not behind. He said he would not ask for what had been withheld, nor apologize for recognizing what others had chosen to overlook. He said that worth did not require decoration, and that silence could be a form of strength. His words were not poetic, but they carried conviction, and the room listened despite itself. Eleanor felt the weight of the moment settle upon her shoulders. She understood that this choice, though offered, required her assent. To accept was to invite scrutiny and consequence. To refuse was to reclaim the safety of obscurity at the cost of truth. She thought of the key in her possession, of the library fire, of being asked what she desired. She lifted her chin and met his gaze, her voice steady as she spoke her acceptance aloud. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some faces registered admiration, others disdain. Alliances recalculated themselves in real time. Sir Percival looked as though the floor might give way beneath him, his ambition colliding with fear. Eleanor's sisters stared, their practiced smiles gone. The Duke inclined his head, acknowledging the room, and with a courtesy that brooked no argument, led Eleanor toward the center of the assembly. Music resumed hesitantly, as though uncertain of its role in this altered narrative. The Duke addressed the guests once more, declaring his intention to court Eleanor Ashcombe openly and without apology. He spoke her name clearly, restoring it to the space from which it had been quietly removed. The sound of it echoed, undeniable. Eleanor felt something loosen within her, a long-held tension releasing into breath. As the evening drew on, conversation resumed in altered tones. Eleanor moved beside the Duke, aware that every gesture was being recorded, every glance interpreted. Yet she felt anchored in a way she never had before. The Duke spoke to her quietly, offering reassurance not through promises, but through presence. He did not shield her from scrutiny. He stood with her beneath it. When at last they parted for the night, the Duke paused before releasing her hand. His eyes held a question he did not voice, an acknowledgement of what remained uncertain. Eleanor answered with a nod, small but resolute. As she ascended the staircase alone, the sounds of society receding behind her, she understood that the declaration had resolved nothing and changed everything. The choice that shattered polite expectation had been made, but its cost had yet to be exacted. In the quiet of her chamber, Eleanor felt anticipation coiled tightly with apprehension, knowing that tomorrow would demand more than courage. It would demand constancy from both of them in a world already sharpening its knife.